Welcome back. Good morning, Richard. It's good to see you this morning.
Good morning. What is the date today?
It is the last day of June. So the first
Whoa.
half of 2024 is officially behind us.
That's
And
what I was thinking.
we
We're
are
at the end
set,
of June.
we
Woo.
are set to hit that second half starting tomorrow.
And Cassie, if you're listening, let's start the countdown to Christmas, right?
Christmas, that's right.
Cassie's starting July. So it's only 127 days left until
That's
Christmas.
right.
So, and we're in hurricane season, right? Right in the middle of hurricane season or beginning of hurricane season. But man, it's hard to believe we've used up 6 months, huh?
Yep, it is. It has flown by. But today we're going to talk about a common topic or a frequently discussed topic, especially in the self-help circles. We're going to talk about it with a little twist, I think, and that is, there is a lot of self-help. There are a lot of self-help books and a lot of self-help advice and websites and things like that out there that talk about self-care and talks about, we've even talked on this podcast before about positive psychology and optimism and things like that. But we're gonna kind of talk about it with a little twist, as I said, where sometimes some of those things can go a little bit too far or go into a direction that can actually cause us some more problems. And we're gonna talk a little bit about sort of the toxic side of self-care.
Bernie, I don't know about because you and I were educated. We finished our doctoral degrees in different generations. And so we never talked about self-care during my training program. Did you talk about it?
Not much, no, a little bit.
But today, in today's program, self-care is an important component of doctoral training. So there had a shift to, well, let's talk about self-care because you have to take care of yourself and you have to be this and you have to be that.
Right.
It always felt a little bit selfish or narcissistic or something that, well, first of all, I have to take care of myself. And I understand that. We often use the example of put your oxygen mask on first so that you can help others, that analogy. But there's something maybe it's in the age of internet or social media that self-care is good, but like vitamins or anything else that's good for you, too much emphasis on self-care, too much emphasis on being upbeat all the time, if it moves too far in one direction, can become what this author calls toxic positivity.
Right.
So you can overdo it, right? And that's where we want to go today, because I think you and I agree that you have to maintain some balance between being positive and, glass half empty, glass half full, sort of that outlook. That there are times when you do experience negative emotions, you need to acknowledge those, and you also have to deal with those. So the world is not always a happy place.
Right. One of the things we did talk about a lot in my program, and I then taught a lot about it when I taught in the graduate program, and that is, knowing yourself. And
exactly,
we commonly talk about it in clinical programs because you want to know it from the perspective of your own biases and things like that. If you have sort of some intrinsic biases against particular groups or somebody for some reason, you just need to be aware of that. Sometimes that happens if there's some trauma in our life or something like that. But it also is related to self-care, because you need to know yourself to know what you need to thrive, what you need to reinvigorate yourself and to give re-energize yourself, but also what you need to avoid, so you can find that balance between what you need to consume and also what you need to avoid.
Yeah, I'd like to underline what you just said, because self-care begins with self-knowledge. You have to know who you are. You're absolutely right. What do I need to do my best work? Do I need to work 4 days a week or 3 days a week or 5 days? What do I need to thrive, to feel really good? But also, what should I avoid? You know,
Right.
what do I need to avoid to function optimally? So when we talk about self-care, we begin with self-care begins with knowing yourself. You have to have that intimate. I think that's the most important part, getting to know what you need to thrive.
Right. Absolutely. So when we think about when this moves into a sort of a toxic direction, what we're really talking
Mhm.
about is, part of knowing yourself is in part recognizing and acknowledging some of these negative things, again, like you said, just said, things that we need to avoid and things that we need to, maybe eliminate from our life, that because they just cause problems. So when we become too positive, when we move into this direction where our pursuit of happiness is all encompassing and becomes all consuming, to the point where we ignore all other emotions, and like try to maintain this, like, the world is great all the time, there's never a problem, we'll just ignore everything, we'll just keep moving and just fake it till you make it, every
Right.
day, every minute of every day. Man, that can cause some problems.
I have a yeah, it's when the pursuit becomes I think that I have two problems with this, and I acknowledge that maybe it's my bias. When your pursuit of maintaining your schedule and your happiness, when it starts to affect other people, and I think of us as professionals, people will say, well, I don't work after this hour. I don't take this and I don't do this to protect myself. But if one of your patients needs your help, you do have an obligation. I mean,
Right.
and your happiness, your boundaries, as some people call them, if your boundaries begin to adversely affect your patients, then I think it's your obligation as a professional to rethink your boundaries. Because while they might be serving one purpose, if you're in the helping professions, if you're a first responder, you might have to put your happiness aside to take care of the people that you said you're going to take care of. And that might mean that you have to be more flexible. And sometimes you do have to work when you don't want to, either before hours or after hours. The other thing that bothers me is when in your pursuit of happiness, that you simply ignore everything else going on around you. I have a friend. I don't know that I would call this person a friend. It's somebody I know kind of casually. I have never seen this person ever talk about anything negative.
Mhm.
And it's like every day is just this beautiful. And I know that this person has struggles. I mean, there have been divorces, there have been deaths, there have been sickness. And I know that the person is experiencing these things, but never, ever, ever talks about them. And I don't think talks about them with anybody. And
Yeah.
I've always wondered about what does this person do with these other things that are going on in life. And
Right.
that worries me about something. It almost feels like a mania, that but
Right.
nobody can be mad 24 hours a day, every day of the year. But
Yeah.
I always often what happens to these negative emotions. And that's what I worry about, because I know there are negative things happening in the family's life. But man, it's like nothing is ever wrong. Today's the best day of my life. Everybody is doing great. We're all running. I mean, all the kids, all the spouses, everybody's doing great all the time, every day. It's
Yeah.
just not possible.
Right. And I think that we get to that point for a couple of different reasons. And there's a few reasons that the author of this article that we're gonna post in the show notes. There's a couple of things that the author mentions. But I think one of the things is, as I mentioned a moment ago, we as a culture consume a lot of self-help. We there's entire sections of the bookstores on self-help, and all of those kinds of making your life better and everything. And most of those are written sort of from a cognitive behavioral perspective, and it's all about changing the way that you think so that you change the way that you behave. And if you change the way that you think from something negative to something positive, positive things are going to be more likely to happen, and everything is going to be great. And sometimes
Right.
sometimes that can be a problem. Sometimes you have to acknowledge things are not great right now, and we need to do something about it. So I think that that's something that sort of got the ball rolling in popular culture and all. But what this author talks about, one of the points that this author makes, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, because man, I would love to figure out a way to address it in a better way. But that is social media life. How do we present on social media? And it has been a problem probably since MySpace and Facebook and all those things came out, where we have to present ourselves in this great way all the time. Every post, if you're on Facebook and you look at some of your friends' posts, a lot of times we're scrolling through, and it just looks like our friends are having the time of their life every day, all the time.
Right.
And it can't be that way. But we have this social media self that we have to present, so it has to look like everything's wonderful all the time.
Right. Yeah, because what we're going to talk about here is how does positivity, how does self-care become toxic? Well, one of the ways it becomes toxic is if you're always projecting your social media self, that you're sort of wedded to your Facebook post page. And that's who I want to be every day. Always happy. I have lots of friends. I have a perfect family. I'm eating great food all the time. People say, oh, it was so fun. We used to say it was so much fun. And now we say, oh, it's so fun. So fun all the time, no matter what I'm doing. I'm my best self all the time. And it's become something like, if there's anything negative, if you let anything negative in, that's somehow a personal failure. It's not, because negative happens. Okay. And when you deny your stress, you deny the other problems, you deny your anxiety, as this person that I mentioned earlier does, you're not dealing with your own reality.
Right.
And you're ignoring part of your life. And there's a danger in that. Okay. Because if you're not thinking about and dealing with your stressors, it's going to worsen your isolation, because you're not talking about it, you're not dealing with it, and it's only going to get worse. I think that those negative things that you're trying so hard to ignore are simply going to increase, the pressure will increase, they're going to metastasize and become worse. You can't be a real live Facebook character.
Right. Yeah. There is a, I mentioned the phrase, fake it till you make it earlier. And there are times when that kind of approach is okay. There's some times when that's acceptable. But as you said, if it's like that all day, every day, then you're clearly not focusing on things that you need to focus on. One of the main points I think that we've made in previous podcasts is the importance of stress, the importance of failure, for example. There is a lot to learn about ourselves through our failures. Those are the things that make us stronger. Those are the things that show perseverance and resilience and all of those kinds of things. If we constantly deny ourselves that this happens to us, if we constantly deny that we failed, constantly deny that we have some shortcomings, or that we didn't quite make the mark in some of these areas, we're not really taking the opportunity to learn, or to address problems that we have, or to fix things to make ourselves better. We just sort of stay in this almost delusional perspective for the rest of our life.
Right. And there are people who simply ignore anything negative, like an overdue bill, or a traffic ticket, or a medical test that they're supposed to have. Anything that's negative, they simply keep shoving in the background, because they want to have fun. They want to enjoy life. Well, eventually those negatives will continue to stack up, late fees, or delinquencies, or your credits. I mean, it could be financial, it could be mental health, it could be physical health. If you're not dealing with some of those things that are causing you stress, they're simply going to increase and eventually overwhelm. So when it comes to this idea of the social media self, of just being happy, I think that when true self-care is a balance learning how to manage the good things, but learning how to manage all of your feelings.
Right.
And we have the obligation to acknowledge, despite what social media is telling us, we have this obligation to acknowledge that there are going to be stressors, anxieties, disappointments, failures, and you also have to learn to deal with those. The good example is the child who always succeeds, gets all A's all the time.
Right, and I think what you said a moment ago, fits within that really well. Is that when you constantly deny those things, you're not learning from them. You're not progressing with them, and so you're just stuck, and
right.
you live in this I called it a delusional world, but it's an artificial space that you reside in that doesn't help you get where you want to go, and you just I think it can lead to social problems, it can lead to relationship issues, it can lead to work-related problems, because if there's not a problem, then you don't change anything. And if you don't change things, you can't progress, you can't grow. And
That's
you
right.
have to have some of that.
Right. And so be careful that you're not creating your social media, that you're not trying to create this social media self, or that the cameras are always running, or that you always want to look a certain way or be a certain way because you want to project this image of I'm living my best life. Don't you wish you were living yours too? Don't deny the stuff, because the negatives are there. They will simply increase, and they're going to create problems eventually. So learn how to deal with the positives and the negatives.
That's right, because true self-care is a balance and requires learning how to manage all of your feelings, not just focusing on positive feelings and avoiding negative feelings. It's a balance of all those feelings.
Yeah, self-care isn't about being happy all the time. Self-care is learning how to manage everything. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, the second perspective from this author is something referred to as oppressive optimism. And that's it's a very interesting perspective, because I tend to be a pretty optimistic person. But when you think about it from this perspective, you can certainly see how this can become a problem. And oppressive optimism refers to the belief that everything happens for a reason. Now, I want to differentiate between saying that everything happens for a reason versus we can learn from everything that happens in our life. Those are two different things. But saying that everything happens for a reason suggests that we have this passive experience and passive role in life, that things just happen, and if I ignore how bad my job is, kind of tying this back to the first thing, if I ignore how bad my job is, a better job is going to come along somewhere, and it's just going to happen for a reason. There's a reason why I'm at this job, and when the universe, when whoever says that it's time for me to have something better, it's going to happen, and I'm just waiting for it, and it's going to be great. Well, that's problems.
Yeah, oppressive optimism. There's two important words embedded in this one, in the second explanation. We all, at different times in our lives, everybody experiences fear and uncertainty. Those two things, okay? We just do. When you rely on everything happens for a reason, you're sort of invalidating, and here again we see this balance, we see ignoring this stuff. Oppressive optimism, the idea that everything happens for a reason, sort of negates this idea of fear and uncertainty. It invalidates those two things. So you experiencing these emotions, fear and uncertainty, and yet you say, well, everything happens for a reason. No. When you're facing a crisis that produces fear and uncertainty, you don't want to hear that, well, everything happens for a reason. You just lost your job. You just got a diagnosis. You just, your family is falling apart. Well, everything happens for a reason. It's not helpful. Not going to help. I don't want to hear that. I can tell you, because whose reason, who do we attribute? What do I do about it? Okay. Telling me that everything happens for a reason. Well, wait a minute. I've got today, right now, I have fear and uncertainty, and to be told that, well, everything happens for a reason.
Everything happens for a reason, but my mortgage is due. And so how do I pay my mortgage today
Right.
when I don't know what the reason is for, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, let's face it, some diseases are chronic and incurable. Okay. Now, there's nothing positive about that. There's no reason for this to have happened to, I mean, that's not an adequate explanation of what I'm experiencing in my life right now.
Yeah.
Um, some events create fear. I mean, I'm sorry, you know, the bank is calling because they want the mortgage payment. Otherwise, they're going to take, okay, that creates fear. And
Mhm.
sometimes you have to acknowledge that fear and talk about that with somebody else,
Right.
with someone. I mean, you have to do something with that fear. And
Right.
oppressive optimism, well, everything happens for a reason, prevents you from processing that trauma or fear or uncertainty or anxiety.
Right. And once you get to that point, once you are ignoring that stuff and you're thinking, you know what, making it passive and everything happens for a reason, so I'm just going to let this go, it creates the lack of the absence of action is an action. If you have a problem and you don't do something about it because everything happens for a reason,
Yeah.
then what you're doing is not doing anything about solving the problem, and that can make the problem worse. It can exacerbate all of these issues that we experience in life sometimes, and make things even worse for us. So
Right.
that being oppressively optimistic, and there's a balance that you have to find between, I think it's good to be optimistic, but you have to recognize that, what, things are pretty lousy right now. And I don't know what to do. I'm going to have to struggle for a little bit right now. I can be optimistic in believing that at some point I'm going to be able to work myself out of it, but I'm at least
Mhm.
acknowledging that this is where I am right now.
Right. Now, having said that, there's nothing wrong with saying everything happens for a reason. I mean, we've all done it.
Mhm.
Okay. No matter how bad things get, well, everything happens for a reason. But the problem with oppressive optimism, this exaggerated optimism, is that you have these feelings. We have emotions. We have many kinds of, there are about 320 different emotions. What we're saying here with oppressive optimism is you have both positive emotions and negative emotions, and you can't ignore, once again, you can't ignore these negative emotions like fear, like uncertainty, because if you just ignore them, they're not going to go away, no matter. I mean, you can tell yourself that everything happens for a reason as much as you want. Other friends can tell you that. They're not going to go away, and they're going to continue to do damage. Whether you're aware of the damage or not, they're going to continue to do damage. And so with oppressive optimism, true self-care, we talk about true self-care, makes room for all of your emotions.
Mhm.
You have to deal with all of them, and you can't dismiss them for any reason, whether it's everything happens for a reason or not. But that phrase, you have to be very careful with that phrase. Everything happens for a reason, but don't ignore those, don't negate, don't invalidate these other emotions. If you're truly doing self-care, you're managing all of your emotions.
Absolutely. No, the last the last point that this author makes is, again, another one that's very, very similar, related to these others, and that is, overloading yourself with affirmation. You know what? Oh, that we talk about, and we want to practice positive affirmations. We think good about ourselves, and and imagine ourselves, in our ideal form and everything.
Mhm.
But repeatedly saying, I am strong, I can handle anything, I've got this, I can do it, I don't need anybody else, I don't need anything else. Again, sometimes we have experiences where we have to recognize that, what, I need help with this. I think that this
Mhm.
comes about a lot of times in mental health, because people experience, especially, men, historically, men will experience depression or anxiety or some kind of distress. And instead of telling anybody about it, instead of, what, I got it, I'm fine, it's going to be all right, having some maybe oppressive optimism there, but just saying that they got it and they can handle it all on their own, and not seeking help and not asking for the help that they need, that creates another problem, because then you are stuck again in the mud of, experiencing problems that you really can't do by yourself. Some problems need a team. Some people need, or some problems you have to have somebody else to help you work through them. It's just a
Right.
point of reality.
Right. This one, when I was reading about this, it reminds me, it sort of brings me back to the first one that we talked about, the social media self. There are people who never share
Mm-hmm.
anything with anybody else. That now I can do this myself. I don't want to share. I don't want anybody to know that there's anything wrong in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and if there is, I can take care of it. I'll handle it myself. No matter what it is, I can handle it myself. When you do this, that kind of thinking stops you from sharing your pain and your struggles with others, and that leads to isolation, to social isolation.
Right.
You have got to be able to talk to somebody, not whine, not complain, but you have to be able to talk to certain people, whether they're family members or close friends or professionals. You have to be able to talk to somebody because you have to share this pain. You have to share the struggle. And if you don't admit your vulnerability, all you're doing is you're creating a false sense of strength, a false sense of security. You have to be able to admit vulnerability. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Your vulnerability doesn't make you weak.
Right.
Sharing that vulnerability ties you to other people who can be supportive and help you work through that. When we talk about
Yeah.
processing our emotions, we process them with other people,
Right.
whether they're family members or friends or professionals. You process them with somebody else. And
Absolutely.
this denies, affirmation overload denies you that opportunity.
Right. And it creates this hyper invincibility where you feel like
Right.
nothing can hurt me, nothing, no problems can affect me. And if you want to think about a really specific example, you just think about our health and how we eat and how we refuse to exercise and do those things that we all know make us healthier, make our lives better. We all know that we shouldn't be eating certain things or consuming certain things, but yet we do it anyways because we have this sense of, that happens to some people, but it's not going to happen to me. Um,
Right.
and it's that false sense of invincibility that puts us into this space where we ended up doing harm to ourselves because we're not getting the help that we need. We're not making the choices that we should be making because we're just denying
Mhm.
the reality of these difficulties, these challenges.
Right. Right. And bottling these emotions up, again, we talk about it with, regardless of the reason, bottling those emotions up is they're going to continue to increase. They're going to continue to do
Right.
damage. And it's going to continue to lead to isolation when you don't share these negative feelings. Not a sign of weakness. The Australians have a phrase called white anting, white like the color anting. And apparently there's this insect in Australia that it eats the inside of furniture, like think of a table leg. And the ants get in there and they eat the inside of the table leg, and eventually the table falls. You don't realize they're in there because they're
Mhm.
inside the leg. The surface looks good, and eventually the table falls over. And I think that's a good analogy to think about these negative emotions. They're going to be there, and they're going to be white anting you. They're going to be at work, and
Right.
they're going to be harmful, and they're going to be harmful personally, but also they're going to cause isolation. And that to me is the biggest issue here, is that when you're having these negative emotions, sharing them with others, getting the support of others is going to make that burden much easier to carry.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
third, we have this idea that when you talk about true self-care, it's not just to be happy. True self-care comes from recognizing and embracing your vulnerabilities and seeking support from people who can help you work through those. You have to acknowledge your vulnerabilities. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of failure.
Yeah. It's a sign of self-awareness, if anything,
Self-awareness.
you know,
That's what we began with. You said at the very beginning, you got to know yourself.
Absolutely.
You know, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's what it is.
So check out the article. Again, the link is in the show notes. And we do believe in positive psychology. We do believe in, optimism and looking and feeling, positive about our lives and making positive progressions in our life. But we don't want to take it so far that it becomes toxic and that we actually do ourselves harm because we are ignoring some of these other things in our life that we really need to acknowledge and to deal with. So check out the article, and we hope that it will be helpful for everyone. So that is it for today. And until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.